for joining us for this Founders Funda series. We have initiated this new series wherein very successful startup founders can share their experiences and know-hows on various aspects that are critical for fellow startup entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. We plan to do this one series every month going forward. So it will be on various aspects. Today we are talking about funding. So today's Founder Funda session will be on the art of fundraising, and it will be led by Abhi Krishna, founder and CEO of CareStack. CareStack is a cloud-based SaaS platform for the dental industry. CareStack is currently being used by thousands of dentists in North America as a single integrated platform to increase efficiency, minimize cost, and improve patient care. CareStack started off with a 15-member team in 2015 and has now grown to a 200-plus member team with offices in Orlando, USA and Trivandrum. In recent times, the company had raised Series B round of fund from a hedge fund, Steadview Capital, along with the Californian arm of Delta Dental. It also has another, the Series 1 was raised from multiple investors, F Prime Capital, 8 Roads Ventures, and Axel Partners, who also participated in this round. So as a founder CEO of CareStack, Abhi has been involved in the company's product strategy, the funding, and building the distribution partnership network. Today we are also with us Ravindranath Kamath, charter member of TiE Kerala and co-founder of Next Education, who's also invested in CareStack. Kamath will share the investor perspective and also share tips in terms of what he usually looks out while doing an investment. Thank you, Abhi and Kamath, for joining this session. May I request Abhi to briefly introduce CareStack to us and also talk about the aspects such as how do you approach investors, what are the preparedness taken, and probably expansion plans too. Before I hand over to Abhi, participants, I request you to post your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. You can today, in fact, you can also use the raise hand option, which is underneath your in the Zoom screen. We'll unmute you, and you can ask questions directly during the interactive session after Abhi presents. Over to you, Abhi.
Okay. So Nirmal, can I share a? So how do I share? Just share my screen.
There's a share screen option underneath.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Perfect. Perfect.
Great. I'm just gonna press end. So yeah, it's okay. You can see the screen properly, right?
Yeah, it's perfect now.
Okay. So I'll get started on our journey and probably, try to explain the process that we went through all the way through where we are now. So, so it's very simple, right? This graph that you see here, this is really a graph that depicts a theory called as Dunning-Kruger Effect, right? So what the theory states that is, incompetent people quite often do not know what their incompetence really is, and therefore they end up actually thinking about themselves as competent people on those areas where they have actually no clue of, right? That's called as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what happens is, it's plotted between confidence and competence, right? So when you're actually stupid, your confidence is really high, and then you gradually start learning, and the more you learn, your confidence comes down, your competence basically moves up, and you start becoming wiser. And at some point in your process of learning, you move from a peak of ignorance to a state called as valley of despair, right? And then you basically find your rhythm, and you go through a slope of enlightenment, and finally reach a plateau of sustainability where um, you're happy for the most part of where you are with life in itself. The rush is not there. You just feel at peace with yourself, right? There is no better graph to theory to describe CareStack, right? So I'll get started there, right? So yeah, this guy has to be here, so I can, okay. So, I started at the peak of ignorance, right? And in order for me to explain that better, um, it might be good to start off with my background and, what I used to do and, how that led to the formation of CareStack. So before we ventured into building a product company, I ran a small service company, which did two things. One is we basically were working with customers in terms of understanding the requirements around which they were trying to conceive business applications. And all, fortunately, almost all of our customers were, mid-sized companies to large corporations in US, and we translated that understanding into software prototypes, which was well-designed prototypes that the stakeholders basically used to, for a variety of reasons, all the way from really creating shared consensus among their team members to validating their own ideas and etc. Right? So that was the nature of our business. Simply put, we got paid for user experience design and software prototyping. So that was my background. This is all prior to really building a product company. And, along the way, I met a couple of people who are clients of mine and who are using my prototype to really sell concepts and services to the end customer, which were larger corporations, and really creating products on the customer's dime, right? So I was, for the very first time, exposed to a sales process where you never had an actually product, but really you had an idea which got translated into a working prototype, and a prototype which did not require coding. And through the strength of a powerful conversation and through some amount of visual communication, the idea was really getting sold, and customers were signing up to really fund the idea and then really build a solution. And the company who builds the solution gets to keep the IP, right? The intellectual property in itself, and the IP thus built would basically get licensed out to similar customers, so on and so forth. And I was fortunate enough to be part of such exercises a couple of times in my life. And since I was the guy who was creating the prototype, my interactions were all with C-level stakeholders. And I got a chance to interact with them, interview them, ask the right questions, extract information, and then really take that information and get back to them with a prototype, right? So this is the process that I was used to, right? And two things basically caught my mind: that you could really sell an idea on a prototype. And the second one is, if you're selling it well enough, somebody is going to fund you to really create the product. And to top it all, you get to keep the intellectual property and resell it as much as you can, right? So that was my background before CareStack. So my confidence was really high, right? I had not built a product. I had not built teams. I did not have any competency in terms of really creating a product, right? My confidence was, if my clients can do it, so can I, as long as I get to create the right prototype, right? So that's how CareStack was born. It was born at the peak of ignorance, where we decided to really build a technology company in probably one of the most difficult industries in US. So the industry that I operate in, it's the dental industry is a very closed industry, which has legacy companies from the distribution space pretty much managing the industry end to end. All these companies are $50 billion plus in revenue and have been around for the last 100 years. They possess relationships with the entire market. And the end customer, who are the dentists, they have a very strong bonding with the sales reps within these distribution companies, right? So the distribution companies sell desktop-based software along with X-rays and other consumables that the dental practice uses, right? So it's a tough, very, very tough industry, right? Because it's change management at its core. When you replace software inside a dental office, you're pretty much, it's like open heart surgery, right? That would be a good analogy. It's like ripping apart everything, changing all the systems, retraining all the users, moving all the legacy data, so on and so forth. It's a lot of change management. But when I started, obviously my confidence was high, my wisdom was very, very low. And I thought this is doable. And therefore, at the peak of ignorance, we started CareStack with a vision to really go about and build software for the dental industry, right? And I looked around, and you had 6 different software systems that was typically needed to operate a dental office. And all these systems wouldn't talk to each other, but in their own ways, they serve the functionality of these offices, okay? So I thought, okay, anyways, we are building software. Why not build all the 6 systems into one system, right? And what was the rationale behind such a decision? It's simple, because I have never built systems before. And therefore, I thought this is just doable, right? So the vision for CareStack was set that we would create a large enterprise ERP system for a dental office, where everybody would come on to one system and pretty much manage everything inside their office. And we would displace everybody else, including 100-year-old distribution companies, okay? So that's pretty much the starting point. So fast forward 3 years, and I was at what you call here as the valley of despair. So 2015 to 17, we ended up creating waste. That's the best way to put it, right? So why? So it's interesting to share some of my learnings, which really took me from a position of confidence to a position where you are basically put in your spot, to the extent that you realize that this battle should have never been picked in the first place, right? Had I been a little bit more wiser. So the journey goes like this, right? So 2015 we start, we decide to build software. We happen to be here in Trivandrum, and therefore we set up the office in Trivandrum. I did the mistake of really finding a client who was willing to pay for really creating the product and let me keep the IP, right? The very principle on which I wanted to really build software. So, we ended up making Orlando our headquarters, where we found our first client. So the number one mistake is we chose 2 geographic areas where traditionally you do not have a lot of product companies, and therefore product engineering talent was not readily available. Product engineering culture was not built. But we never bothered about it. We thought we could do it, right? Because you're still at the peak of ignorance. So the journey started in 2015, and we went about and recruited more people, almost 80 to 90% of those people fresh out of college, And we thought that software would get built if we basically give them prototypes. So I took the skills of my past industry and tried to apply it in a new space, thinking I knew it all. And over 3 years, at the end of 3 years, we ended up really creating an elaborate prototype as opposed to a product. So 2015 to 2017, it took me 3 years to really understand that the whole journey was started on the wrong foot, and product engineering and a technology-based business on the cloud is a different kind of business where the focus needs to be a lot more different, right? So 3 years of wastage happened. The cost was pretty expensive because by the merit of what I was good at, we were able to sell to 100 plus clients without a product, right? And in 3 years, we delivered a substandard product, and almost 80% of those customers left us. So at the end of 3 years in 2017, in spite of being able to sell 100 customers, you are really back to the basics where you have your first 20 customers and a product which was started on the wrong foot to be expanded upon and then to be built, right? So, by 2017, we knew what we had to do if we were to basically, get ourselves out of the situation, right? And so, okay, we'll keep on this slide. So from the valley of despair, we started climbing the slope of enlightenment, right? And that time from 2017, 18, 19, those were the last 2.5 years is really when we got the basics right, which meant a few things. We ended up cleaning the legacy of those 3 years that we basically created. We focused more on building teams with a reasonably good degree of ownership. We brought in vertical subject matter expertise to the teams here. So we tried to mimic end user experience inside the teams here in Trivandrum. And we ended up really being far more responsive and far more nimble with the way we were delivering features to our customers and taking care of their needs, right? So that's kind of how our 2 years got spent. We think we are another 3 years away to getting to a plateau of sustainability where we could have really built up self-organized product culture, where product basically, really solves problems and customers are going through a massive phase of delight associating themselves with the brand of CareStack. So that's our small journey in a nutshell, right? So now we come down to the art of raising cash, right? So we are probably 5 years into doing what we are doing. We have raised 40 million plus till date. We are a team of 300 people with 25 people in US and the rest of the folks here in India. The engineering team is fairly large with 100 people. When it comes to raising cash, my experience is fairly limited to technology businesses on the cloud and those technology businesses which has a vertical nature to it. For example, if you ask me how to grow a business like Freshdesk, which is far more horizontal, applicable to various industries, I might not have the necessary knowledge to share with people. But what I do know is the nuances of really building a product-based business in a very specific to an industry where it solves a valuable problem. And everything I talk about raising cash basically falls into that sphere of my experience. Okay, so that's what I'm familiar with. The second bit of raising cash is basically, when you communicate, essentially any business for that matter lies at the confluence of business intent along with a customer obsession and emotionally vested employees, right? So all these three components have to come together to create the foundation for a business, right? So what does business intent mean, right? So from the cloud perspective, the first and foremost thing is that we got to recognize that what we are engaged with is really a business, because the moment you put your product on the cloud, it's not a product anymore. It's really your cloud business, right? It goes through all the components of a business, which what it means is that you have something to sell on the cloud, you have a way to acquire customers, you have a way to onboard them, and you have a way to support and retain them for life. And therefore, the business intent has to be there. That the way you do all these things should be economically viable, which means it has to fit into the economics of your recurring cost on the cloud, and the linear cost that you try to accumulate as your business grows. Those costs needs to be contained, right? So all the way from product to client acquisition to onboarding to support and account management. The end goal is to keep those recurring costs and the nonlinear growth, the recurring cost as low as possible, and try to grow non-linearly. And for all these things to happen, engineering has to be at the center of it, right? So that business intent is really to make sure that you have such robust engineering that allows you to have favorable cloud economics, low recurring cost, and non-linear growth as part of your business model. Okay, so that's the spirit of your venture from a business intent perspective. Customer obsession, right? Typically, solving small problems here and there isn't really going to get you far along. So we got to go into the heart of the problem and solve really, really hard problems where, it requires more than technology, right? It requires your heart and soul into it. And, the problem has to be such that once you solve for it, it takes a long time for someone else to replace you, right? And to solve hard problems, you need to have a very, very obsessive state of mind with your customers, and you need to empathize and get down to the pain of what they're going through to really identify the problems. You need to fall in love with the problem first, and then have the necessary degree of empathy that your customers face to the extent that you can form a solution. So solve hard problems. And when you solve hard problems, make sure that the way you design the solution, all the way from solution design to delivery till somebody uses it and feels happy about using it, that acts as a differentiator for your business, right? And then the third component is really emotionally vested employees, right? So everything is personal, right? Especially in an early stage startup, there isn't a thing called as professional. It's all personal, right? So a professional, and this thing that we called culture is really imaginary in nature, right? Because nobody has really defined it. And culture is what people talk about you when you're not in the room for the most part. So getting your employees to be emotionally vested as part of the journey is key, right? And the work culture basically has to be things that you can follow through rather than what you find on corporate web pages, right? So if you set the culture as client centric, then that's the culture. That's probably the only thing that really works in your org. But if you try to put it as client centric and we follow a culture of work hard, party hard, then it means that probably you are also allowing employees to have it's an employee first culture which goes against a client first culture, right? So those are all mutually opposing priorities. So choose your culture statements very carefully, because culture at the end of the day comes down to what people talk about you when you're not there, and therefore, uh, set things that you can actually follow through. So coming back to what I was saying, so, the spirit of your venture is what you really need to communicate when you raise cash to your investors. And you've got to communicate it from three angles: the business intent, how obsessed you are with the customer to the extent that you're solving hard problems, which are hard to solve and then very hard to replace you once you solve it. And how you're using design thinking and solution design delivery all the way down to somebody actually creating customer delight in your as a key differentiator of your offering, right? And then how you intend to build emotionally vested employees across the process. This basically becomes your messaging, at least in the very early stages of the company. So that's your messaging, and then we go down to the funding bit, right? And typically, sourcing funding happens from individual investors and institutional investors. Institutional investors are largely financial investors and strategic ones. Individuals fall across a broad range of category. Typically, after having gone through the journey, right, I tend to kind of believe that, and this is my thinking. So for the most part, meaningful contributions into the business is much needed from individual investors as you are trying to raise your early stage of capital. And therefore, I would think that, for me at least, a good enough independent investor is able to fund $250,000 into a business at its seed stage, right? And there are not a lot of people who have the cash to do that, right? And therefore, it might not happen to everybody, but those are the kinds of individuals that you can actually seek to get on your cap table when you get started, right? So those are good benchmarks to set when you go out seeking for individuals. That are they able to fund $250K, which is a meaningful seed check? Do you have strong emotional resonance with the person on the other side? And do they have good tech focus, right? Because at least from our journey, the first 3 years was a complete waste of efforts in a lot of directions, right? We basically reinvented the wheel. We wasted time. Emotional stability was very, very low, right? All those things could have been much. All those things are debilitating to the business, right? And year on year, by some stroke of luck, we basically managed to overcome the hurdles and keep ourselves very adaptive on a daily basis to the changing circumstances to the extent that we were able to come out of it, right? So, emotional resonance from investors is a much desirable quality to the extent that they allow you to stay focused on to the mission rather than drag you down, right? So ability to fund $250,000, strong emotional resonance that you can extract with the investors. And especially when you're building technology companies, if your early investor has deep tech focus, it's a big plus, because, in the early stages, all the capital allocation has to go into the product to really make sure that you build a kick-ass product, right? And after having gone through what we have done here, I almost now feel that if you build a good enough product, chances are that the product will sell by itself through happy customers, basically bringing you more customers, so on and so forth. So the choice of individuals, those are the 3 parameters that I would rate high. And in overall, from a quality perspective, is the investor easy to get along? Are they accessible? And that completes my bucket list of people who are great to have on your cap table from an individual capacity. Our cap table has all the investors, at the numbers, and I derive all this information on how we basically structured CareStack and brought in financing partners and so on in the early stages, right? We got over 12 angels who really held the company together in the first 3 years. And then institutional investors came after the third year, right? So from a institutional investor perspective, there is different kinds of institutional investors. There is the venture guys, there's the private equity ones, and the strategic ones, which are large corporations. We got all kinds of institutional investors on the cap table, but mostly look for good funds which can do checks of 5 and above based on the nature of the round in itself. A large value addition could be in the areas of human capital, and helping you get some valuable new business relationships. Those are largely the areas around which an institutional investor can add value. Beyond that, it's just financial value. And operationally, the team has to basically deliver, right? And investors fall along all kinds of categories, just the way entrepreneurs fall along the same line. So mostly it's horses for the courses, right? So pick the investor from an institutional basis based on what you're trying to solve for and the kind of partner that you need. And if you seek around these 3 areas, for the most part, I think those would be my check boxes for picking a good institutional investor, primarily. And then, from a pitching perspective, 2 of the techniques that we apply, one is called as setting up an upfront contract, and the second one is called as staying to the left of the pendulum, right? And an upfront contract is a way for basically letting the investors know from day one, whether it's an angel or an institutional investor, that this process is going to be time bound, right? And making sure that there is going to be a contract, a verbal contract, where you're setting up upfront that within a specific time you're going to close and move on, and therefore you're artificially creating the scarcity of time, right? And the second one is called as staying to the left of the pendulum. That's a very interesting concept because it's called as pattern breaking, right? When you push a pendulum to its extreme left and then leave it, it has a tendency to swing back to right, okay? So it's basically boils down to making sure that you stay to the left of the pendulum, and you are not reducing yourself into a moment of neediness where there is an imbalance of power as you're raising cash, right? And therefore, in most cases, be prepared to say no than yes, and and stay to the left of the pendulum. Keep yourself extremely focused on staying to the left, and feel free to say no, knowing that the pendulum should swing back. So those would be the 2 key concepts to really try to learn as you try to pitch your venture, right? So Nirmal, so those would be my few things. I just did not want this to be a monologue, so I just wanted to give a context, and then open the floor for questions, and then try to answer them to the best of my knowledge.
Perfect. So, Kamath, if you can share some perspective in terms, since you have invested in CareStack,
right? So
how did you go about?
Let me be the first one to ask a couple of questions, right? So Abhi, I think what you said, I think, can you numb it down to us? Let's say we have a person who is not a very experienced in terms of the terminology, right? So can you go to the slide where you say pick the investor, right? I think that is no. Yeah, institutional versus individual, right? So, Abhi, I think that what will be helpful is if you can basically say uh, when you decided to do your first fundraise, right? That's quite a years back. How did you go about finding these individuals, right?
Yeah,
Because we didn't know each other, right?
yeah,
So you got to me, you got to those 10 others, right? Who have actually helped you um, stay put on the ground. Sorry. So um, how did you go about finding those?
yeah. No. So basically, that comes out of research, right? So you have. I had all the cap table built ground up to the extent that I profiled pretty much all the investors in the country to a good extent. I
So
had,
how do you do that?
we use social media channels, right? Social media channels
Like what?
like,
I'm just trying to
yeah, yeah,
it's
I got you, Kamal.
be
So
more concrete for the audience.
yeah, yeah. So like LinkedIn, Angel List, talking to investment bankers, meeting other entrepreneurs, and then asking them cues. So it's a combination of things for the most part, right? Every time I talk to an investor, I almost made sure that I had 5 to 10 other contacts that I was able to get out of the person. So you basically treat each interaction as a path forward to the next one. So that's a good question, Kamat. So when you're trying to build a list of investors, the rejections are a big thing, right? So, and therefore you don't have a lot of time to spend. So qualifying your investors is very, very easy, right? So 90% of the time I spent sharpening the axe, and then 10% of the time was spent actually pitching, right? Um, so profiling of investors through publicly available platforms like LinkedIn, by reaching out to investment bankers and talking to them about what you're doing, and engaging and trying to get information out of them in the process, trying to get an introduction, talking to other entrepreneurs who got funded, being friends with them, and then build some friendships in that direction. Those are the spots where and then really getting referrals from those investors, where you would know that their line of thought doesn't really resonate with yours, segment them into the bucket
Yeah, that's the second thing I wanted to ask you, right? What do you mean by emotional resonance? I think that's I know what you're saying, but it you may want to um, put it in a slightly more
yeah
easy to understand language, right?
yeah. Kamath, you have been my first investor, right? So you have seen me over 5 years, right? So um, some people are just born mercurial, right? It is probably the best way to put it, right? um, at least from my perspective, change quite often doesn't happen to human beings. It basically, people adapt, people don't change. And when you're wired and born a certain way, there's a great chance that you stay that way, and your old habits keep coming to you. And if you're mercurial by nature, um, you are mercurial by nature. That's a fact of life, right? So being flawed becomes the essence of human life, right? People have their own flaws. um, Early stages of really building a company um, is built on the folly of youth as opposed to the wisdom of age, right? So if foolishness is an essential part of really trying to go through a cycle of learning. You basically, if you choose to basically have no ambition to learn along the way, then that's when it becomes really a problem. But but you tend to do foolish things and then really learn from those foolish things. And sometimes you might not listen to you. Come, that I have probably never listened to you for the most part, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean that you recognize the fact that you don't listen to people, right? So that's, to know what you don't know is probably great. And sometimes investors could feel burned that the entrepreneur is not listening.
Just on that note, Abhi, so it's what I found is so between our our journey together. So it's not, as an investor, right? I often find if somebody says yes to everything I say as an investor, right, there is something wrong. See, it's very important and I'm saying this mostly addressing the audience, right? So as a startup, don't be opposed to don't be afraid of opposing what the investor is saying, because when I look at it as an investor, if I have to bring all the ideas to the table, if I have to be right all the time, then I should be running that company, right? So if you as a founder, you as a person more connected with the customers, have to be able to bring in ideas, and you should definitely listen, but you don't have to follow everything that you hear. Go on.
No, but Kamath, I was referring to more obvious things where we could really screw up, right? In spite of not listening, right? And not really listening to people. There's a difference between hearing and listening, right? So while I might have heard you several times, I might have not really put my heart and soul into listening to you and trying to go through that process of listening. And as an investor, it's like raising a kid, right? At some point, the kid chooses to do what they want to do, and therefore, you need to have the expansiveness of mind to stay from a distance and watch the kid fall down and yet be there to help, right? Recognizing the fact that the intent was always great. It's just the path was different, and the path was necessary to be different, and the learning would basically help them move forward in a better shape, right? That emotional resonance is what I was seeking to, right? Okay. That you can identify your journey with theirs. So you can identify the stage of life where you built your company to what the young guys are going through, and then in spite of knowing that they are making mistakes, being there for them and watching them fall down from a distance, but being there for them when they fall down. That is what basically emotional resonance boils down to.
All right. So see, you have as a company, right? CareStack has gotten probably one of the best VC&P firms around, right? Be it Axel. So if you look at Axel and F Prime and SteadView. So how have you been able to get this idea, right? To get them to fund you?
Yeah. So
despite the ups and downs you spoke about, right? So you've gone through it and still convinced some of the marquee investors to come and put money.
Yeah, Kamath.
How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's the same shit, Kamath. It's basically Dunning-Kruger Effect, right? Investors are also not immune to the Dunning-Kruger Effect, right? So incompetent people sometimes don't know what they are incompetent at, and it really takes them the time to really understand the process, right? But in a sorry for being funny, but what I was trying to basically get to is, the marquee investors basically happen because, okay, let me put it this way, right? So there's a few paths to it, right? Again, the choice of investors were all very relevant because almost every round we had a choice of investors, right? On the institutional side, we had 3 choices from which we picked one.
So let me get that straight. So you are saying you had to choose. You had multiple offers and you had to choose.
Yeah. So on all the rounds, we had some rounds we had 2 offers, some rounds we had 3 offers, right? And we always got the benefit of choice, which ones to work with, including the last round. We had 2 on the table, we picked one, right? So the reason for that is you qualify the investors to who has the most context around what you're doing, and who gives you the best recognition that you're solving a large enough problem, right? And who is displaying the biggest amount of emotional resonance, and who can basically continue to support you in future, right? So you make those choices, but from our perspective, getting people to buy into what we are doing at CareStack has all been around choosing the right kind of people who resonate most with the nature of the problem you're solving, and have a clear path to articulating how you have managed to build a technology-enabled way of bringing together the business intent, the customer connection, and an emotionally vested team to really take you forward. And along the ways, your numbers improves, your technology improves, you start attracting bigger, more strategic partners. For example, in last year we had the largest dental insurance company become a CareStack investor. We had the third largest dental distributor basically come and back us. So the financial investors, the marquee investors, while they see the mistakes that we have made, they basically get to see the other side where we have really created the product market fit, and the traction has been built, and now we are moving along the right course. And primarily these mistakes are all related to the kind of problems you're trying to solve. If you're working in an industry like ours, where change management is really high, and forming a great base of strategic capital into the mix along with financial capital is equally key to the financial outcomes that we can produce, right? So the thoughtfulness of how the business model, the go-to-market has been built up, gives financial investors the confidence to come and bet on the team.
Does it always work? So there are also horror stories of your customer becoming your investor, right? Now they are on both sides, and you lose your pricing power. How has that worked?
No, in our case, we don't have a lot of customers as investors, right? We just have the first customer as an investor. That is back in 2015, 16, right? Where we sold the concept to a client who basically gave us the first $1 million. That's our only investor we have had on the table. And then, one of the things of really bringing them as an investor was to get a commitment that they would stop being a dental practice owner and become part of the technology product team, right? Here we have a very large strategic partner which has deep roots into all the 200,000 dental offices in the country. The insurance company basically is literally connected to everybody. So it basically complements our position in terms of branding, in terms of being able to run joint marketing campaigns, having access to the trends that is shaping the industry, both from a provider perspective and from a payer perspective, and therefore helps us to basically keep the technology roadmap nimble and align with those macro trends that is happening in the healthcare landscape. So it basically lends us help. And investors in general, whether it's customer being an investor or otherwise, if it's just a external investor, it's horses for the courses, right? So
Horses for courses.
Whatever that means. But what I'm trying to get to is that's the same with entrepreneurs as well, right? Over time, you basically figure out what really works when you're bringing diverse set of people together, right? We have probably 20 investors on the cap table now, right? With 5-6 institutional investors, and the rest are angels.
So how does that work? You would so is there um, isn't there conflict, right?
No,
Because all of these funds are capable of writing the check individually. They could have written the whole check on their own. So why have you and they chosen to, uh, you know, de-risk, whatever you call it, right?
yeah, it's just a way that, so that brings down, I had one more small slide, because the ventures
And
are,
I have a sort of a selfish question, right? Purely on
yeah,
behalf of the viewers, right?
yeah,
So you would hear, yeah, if there are multiple investors, right? You have no single voice, and you will probably get there'll be probably bit democratic decision making possible, and nobody can impose completely on you. Is that true?
Kamath, I think the last statement is what has been true in our case, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, Entrepreneurs create value, investors don't, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore, and you got to recognize three things, right? Ventures are long, it's a long road,
Oh,
right?
you've changed your view now.
I always, since after the first year of working with you, I got that early on, right? That it's a big 10-year long journey, right? And therefore, what matters to the company is, all those policies and all those practices that you put into place, which eventually becomes your culture. The key of that has to be preservation of the tribe that has been the cornerstone of building your business, and a very strong belief that you are closest to the ground, and therefore what you know about the business better than anybody else, and entrepreneurs truly create value and investors don't. Every time I have deviated from these principles, we have basically gotten burned. The fact that I list these things here doesn't mean that I did those things, right? So I'm just pronouncing some learnings, um, but over the years, equilibrium sets in, and investors understand the kind of people that they're dealing with, what's possible, what's not possible, and a happy medium results. We have not had a lot of trouble managing expectations and managing people. We have picked people with the most sense of context, right? People who have long-term thinking, and in few cases where there were exceptions made, the company basically had to take a beating. And it's important to recognize those mistakes, and it happens on both sides. As we execute a business, we tend to create decisions which basically has repercussions, right? And the other way around, when you take an advice, sometimes it could go the wrong way, and things could end up getting messy, right? So as long as there is a way to get a happy medium, either pre or post those decisions, right, things get down to an equilibrium, right? But the key thing, um, between investors and employees to recognize is that these things are hard work, like 10 to 15 years of grunt work, and near death experiences, and sometimes that means literally near death experiences, right? And if you cannot preserve your core, you won't get far along. And you are closest to the ground, what you're doing more so than anybody else. And therefore entrepreneurs always create value, and not investors. And as long as this happy medium gets set up, I think you can manage investors, just the way investors can manage entrepreneurs, right? It happens on both sides. These guys have also been entrepreneurs in the past, right? And that's, did I give you a good answer there, or?
Yeah, I think it's fair. If I may just add to it, I think what you are saying indirectly is it is the fair conclusion to say you don't have to have multiple investors, but
uh,
whoever has come onto your into the cap table and has some influence or decision making ability, right, is able to think through you, think with you, discuss with you openly, right? That is what you are saying is very important.
that's correct. And a happy medium has to result, you know there can be dissonance at the end of the day, but
so from a
uh,
so from a company that's doing a fundraise, right? You don't know this before you get into it, right?
yeah,
For example, you and I did not know each other, and we had no clue what to expect of each other, right? So it's purely starts as an economic contract. So how do you go about, again, um, is there a way to identify who is your right investor?
that's the entrepreneur's gut, right? That's the entrepreneur's gut. Every time we basically, so you just feel it when you talk to the guy on the
So
other.
okay, personal individual investors, I understand. How do you understand when you select, let's say, an institutional investor? It's not a person, right? It's an entity.
Yeah, you don't select an institutional investor. You actually select the partner within the institutional investor. You
Okay.
the partner you want to work with. You get excited to work with the partner, right? Funds mean nothing. It's the partners who really matter at the end of the day, right? And sometimes you choose to basically say yes to dumb capital, right? Where you don't want people to talk to you at all, and financial value is the only thing that you need, right? So you make those choices. Uh, but you don't gauge a fund by what's written on their corporate website. You basically pick the partner. The
All right.
partners have to sell themselves, really. That's what it comes down to.
All right. Nirmal, I think we have a couple of questions, right? I think we have a good number of questions. Do you want to? Um,
There are some 9 questions in the Q&A section.
Okay.
Uh,
How do I?
if you can take them one by one.
Okay.
how much time do we have, Nirmal?
You can take the relevant ones. I think you could probably
You
take
can
5 or 6 of this.
choose.
Yeah, we have time, another 15-20 minutes.
All right. So you can tell me which ones to.
Nirmal, just tell me which ones. I can only see a question from Sudhakaran Nair.
Oh, okay, that's the chat.
That's
There's
chat.
a Q&A section. So I'll probably read out couple for you.
Why don't you ask? Yeah.
For a product build for the healthcare providers, what is the biggest challenge to get early customers?
It's a catch-22 because you need to build the product right. Product market fit in healthcare is the biggest challenge because healthcare is really a vertical centric business. When you're trying to build a B2B software company in the healthcare space, you are going deep. You're learning about the workflows that really brings together the providers, the payers, the staff, the team members, clinical trials, pharma, med devices. You're trying to bridge all these things together through a central system where workflows mean everything, right? And a workflow could have the baggage of legacy, right? Workflows get formed by the merit of legacy systems that people have been used to doing in the past. And therefore, small features here and there basically can be huge friction points for people to switch from their existing systems. People don't like change, right? The healthcare industry is basically, 24 years behind most other industries from a technology upgradation perspective, from a B2B space, not the systems that consumers use for self-help, but systems that healthcare organizations use, right? So the biggest challenge is getting your product right. It's not getting the product strategy right, it's getting the actual product right. The devil is in the details. And therefore, you can only build these products along with a vested client, right? And so you got to be inside the environment to get the right product built. At least do 100 implementations before the product becomes fully mature, right? To the extent that it's a product which has basically found its product market fit and which can be grown non-linearly, right? To get down to that state, 100 implementations is kind of like a good milestone to have. So it's all about, really bringing down your focus to getting that one customer, right, who is ready to get vested in the process of creation with you from day one. And within that customer, basically go so deep, feature to feature, that you can identify friction points of usage um, for every bit of workflow, and be extremely detail oriented to the extent that, you have figured out, the workflow is so good enough that it's better than the rest of the things in the market, and people can adapt to it easily, right? So it's not about selling to customers in the first year. It's all about selling to that one client well, and then solving your problem in a way that you have thought through at a very, very detailed level, at a workflow level, and then really, taking that whole exercise to over 100 customers, to the extent that you can perfect a product which has a great market fit.
Abhi, are there, is there investor interest in an idea stage startup? Do you think investors usually put in money for idea stages in research and development? Is there a market for that?
No, there isn't, right? Investors need.
How do you know that?
There might be a few exceptions, but that's not the norm, right? Investors need the opposite of what ventures stand for, right? Investors like to finance, and therefore try to get the best deal, the least risky deal at the cheapest price, right? That's what they are motivated to do, right? Ventures don't work that way. Ventures are risky for the first 6 years, no matter what you build, right?
We have exchanged roles here, right? You have become more of me than I have become more of enthusiastic.
No, yeah, probably you're still on the peak of ignorance then.
I am. Good one. But Nival, I think the way, if I would probably tend to differ there, while I agree with Abhi mostly, ideas don't generate value, the actual businesses do. You would probably look at, my advice, if you ask me, is look at some of your friends and family to fund the initial phase, get to working at least a prototype, if not revenue, right? Then approach a proper investor. That's I think probably more. That's what I think.
So I was on the path to describing it. So in the norm is, these are mutually opposing things, right? So you have a bunch of guys who are looking for the best deal at the cheapest price with the lowest amount of risk. That's the motivation on the other side. And the seller here is really the startup founder who's.
So I have a question here. Sorry, I keep interrupting. Otherwise, it's short of time. So Abhi, how do you go about putting a valuation? I think that's the most difficult question all the startups face, right? So how do you say what is the right valuation? How much to dilute? How do you go about it? Or how have you gone about it? More like that.
Yeah, no, that's a very tricky question, right? Because somewhere along the way, you basically get a sense of what makes everybody feel happy at the end of the day. What you don't want in this whole process is buyer's remorse, right? So you get someone, after 6 months, they feel that they have been at the wrong end of the bargain, both ways. That's exactly the situation you don't want to land yourself into, right? So you don't, in my case at least, I have not really bought up valuations with most people I don't want to close with, right? So you don't set the value for the company. Over the course of your conversation, you figure out what the other person basically needs, to the extent that you can do the math without really setting a value for the company, right? It's a skill that comes to you as you gauge the motivations for the other person to really participate in the business without really becoming set on the valuation of the company. You just figure out what creates a happy medium post the transaction for everybody on the table without really stating that this is the value of the company. Once you have metrics basically justifying your business, then it becomes a pure math. It's almost becomes an industry standard. And, you know, whoever holds the position of power basically gets to have the last laugh, right? But in the early stages, the goal should be to not get hung up on valuation. The goal should be to really figure out what's going to avoid buyer's remorse, right? That you really come up with the valuation that keeps everybody on the table happy now and into the future. And your ability to basically make sure that the subsequent value that you create in other events of liquidation, that basically gets the stock prices high within the company, right? So it's two things, right? One is doing a deal where at the end of the day, everybody feels that they have had a share of, you know, the prosperity, right? And everybody leaves the table happy. B, you know, make sure that you can follow through the same process to the way that people who supported you do not feel remorse when you do the next round of raise. So you basically take it upon yourself to you know, to reciprocate the trust they have put in you with better value being built inside the company. And thirdly, you know, even when you negotiate, you've got to figure out a way to send the other person knowing that he has actually won the deal, right? So figure out these things as part of doing the deal, and I think a deal will happen.
All right.
That's
So
always a
raising good money, you know, should you be raising more money than you need, or should you be raising?
Yeah, there isn't a thing called as, you know, this is capital. So every time you raise 5, you actually need 10, right? That's just you know, it's like money. It's just like time expands to fill itself, right? So money has its own way of depleting itself, right? So it's there isn't a thing called as enough money. So you should always raise more.
So do you think you could have it works the other way around also, right? You know, could you have managed with less? You think?
If I was more wise back then, yeah, for sure. You know, there is probably 50% of waste that we have accumulated over 5 years. Had we had our, you know, our eyes on the key things from day one, right? It took 3 years for us to transition from a service company to a product company, right? What we were used to, we were good at sales, right? So we could sell a product which never existed, right? We could basically sell the concept across, but now nobody on this team has built a product before, right? So you underestimated the kind of work that needs to go into a product which has deep resistance to change in the industry. So it took us 3 years to get down to product market fit. And you couldn't slow down raising capital inside within those 3 years. You had to do it year on year so that you could really, you know, stay alive in the market. So if I were to do it again, I would never build a product without actually owning a dental business, right? Yeah. So I would first buy a business to really be in control and build teams from day one who have great context and customer connect. And then go about trying to reduce the waste. I think waste inevitably happens. It doesn't matter. But some bit of reduction we could have basically had if we were to do it again, right?
But Abhi, as a early investor, right, and probably to give you to speak on your side, you have probably done that by getting your first customer as the investor and getting an extremely important you know, part of the whole dental ecosystem as an investor. So probably they bring you those insights already.
No, that's not correct. So the first customer being your investor doesn't really mean that the first one was your customer. Your first customer is that customer who basically gets you the product market fit right. The choice of your first customer has to be such that, you know, there is maniacal obsession from their part and your part to basically make the software serve the value that it basically professes it serves, right? So not the first customer you sign is your real customer. Your real customer comes to you who will basically get those small details perfected, who is paranoid about those small details to the extent that you can understand the friction across the chain and perfect the product out. Sometimes that first customer happens to be your 20 customers, right? So, you know, if I were, that's what I said, Kamath, if I were to do this again, you own the operational business and then you build software that you want to create, eat your own dog food, and then take it to the market so that others can use it, right? When you're not doing that and relying on somebody else's wisdom in terms of product creation, it's a deep degree of trust you put into the process. So at that point in time, you're just trusting the first person who basically is trusting with capital in the process, who is getting vested, but their product knowledge, their ability to basically bring together solutions for the entire industry and distill their subject matter expertise into generic solutions that can be applied for the industry, those are all questionable and doesn't get proven until you start working together, right? So while we had a committed customer, it probably took us maybe 100 implementations to get the product market fit. So by a general theory, if we work that, you know, I implemented 100 customers and I'm fairly confident now that the product works. And I say mature customers, right? People who are using the product day in and day out, then you have a path towards, you know, reasonable amount of confidence that you have built something that the market is willing to use and pay for.
Right. Nirmal, do you want to allow participant to ask, you know, unmute and
Sure.
ask, you know, you can enable that.
Absolutely. If any of the participants have specific questions, you can use the raise hand option on the Zoom screen. I'll unmute you. Okay, there are a couple more questions. Okay, I think Ajmal. Okay, Ajmal, can you go ahead? I've unmuted you.
Hello, sir. Sir, actually, I'm a student, sir. I have a product, but I don't know how to approach an investor and all. But, sir, I hope that my product can revolutionize the HR industry.
Okay.
So, but I don't know how to approach an investor, sir. I don't. The main problem is that I don't know the valuation of my company. Like, how can I calculate it? So, I'm stuck in that step, sir. Sir, our product is in development, but I'm stuck there, sir. Like, so can you please suggest some way, sir?
Yeah, I think this might actually be part of a broader conversation, Ajmal. Yeah, I think we should probably take this question outside of this meeting. If it's a very specific personal question that you're asking, which is very pertinent to your current situation, this question is a big enough question that it would take another few hours for us to basically figure out what you're trying to do. You know, remember, because you know, while we all go through this confirmation bias, okay, and you know, this is where we start as a tribe, as entrepreneurs, right? Wishfully optimistic, extremely confident of revolutionizing the industry, and at some point, you know, that none of what we think we have might actually be true, and this is not necessarily a bad point to start. It's okay, right? But this is where we start, right? So in the context of this question, we might have to sit and talk in detail. Probably not this meeting. Kamath, would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I think probably more
Yes, sir.
transactional response, right? Could be, Ajmal, what you should do is, you know, there is KSUM, right? So I can give you some leads to look up, and then, you know, I'm not trying to address what Abhi said, whether, you know, you're you know, whether your product will actually revolutionize or not. That I'm not getting into that. So purely from an investment point of view, things you can do sitting out of Kerala. I presume you're from Kerala. Things you can do is, you know, look up Kerala Startup Mission. Right? They have that's probably the first set of networking opportunity to actually understand what are the possibilities. There are enough networking opportunities there. You can probably look at TiE as a organization, right? To get the connect, right? Um, uh, where are you based in Kerala?
Sir, I'm from Trishur.
Thrissur. Okay, so Thrissur is anyway the entrepreneur capital of Kerala. So you will definitely find quite a number of people that in around. I think so. Look up KSUM, look up TiE. You will find enough connects.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Abhi.
Namal, you're on mute.
Next one is Binoy Matthew. Go ahead, Binoy.
Good evening, sir. My name is Binoy Matthew. I have a question. It's about what exactly does a person looks for when he's funding a project, or how should we prepare ourselves when, in case if you're looking to get a funding?
Who do you want to answer, me or Abhi?
Sir, in fact, both of you. I think Mr. Kamath will be the best. He's basically an investor.
Okay, so I'll take a dig at it. So look, as a investor, right? Investors, as Abhi said, this is not this is not a charitable investment, right? So there are various type of investors. Depending on your venture, you might need to find the right investor for you. So for example, if there is a venture that is into, let's say, improving some of the social indexes, right? Something that you're doing at the grassroots level to improve, let's say, standard of living, etc., right? That is most ably funded by, there are a lot of NGOs that are there, right? Within, there are local NGOs, there are a lot of CSR funding that will be available if you can get to the right corporates, right? There are these international foundations that fund such projects, right? For example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's an NGO track. There was also another question there from Sonia, who's asked how to raise fund for NGOs. That's different, but you will find that's one track. If it is a for-profit sort of a venture that you are building, then you should see who has potential interest in investing there. Again, what does that person look for? It's a very simple thing. Is a return on investment, right? If it's a financial investment, the investor is looking for a return. There may be other aspects to it, right? But most fundamental question is whether that investor can make a return on that investment. Yeah, there is a risk, he might lose all of it. All that is fine, but that is probably the primary answer. If you can answer that question fairly comfortably, you will get the funding. Does it answer your question?
I guess so.
You're on mute.
Yeah. I think that answers Binoy's question.
Okay.
Yeah. That brings me to the next question. Abhi, what are the factors that you look out for when you search for an investor? And any specific aspects that you research into to get insights on the investors?
Yeah, is it now or what I used to look for?
What you used to as a initial stage startup?
Yeah. See, that's that. What I look for now is just who has the largest pool of cash. That's all I look for. That's now, right? That's not what I used to look for in the past, right? So when we started, it boils down to emotionally resonating with the person on the other side, all the way down to the first 3 years of every year we raise money. right? In all those 3 years, the choice was always on whom do I resonate with the most, right? And who understands me the most as a founder, right? And who can basically take the good and the not so good side of me and my team, right? As a team together. That has been the primary consideration, right? And then comes context, right? Who understands the context, right? The kind of business that we are involved in are businesses with 10 years of venture building window, right? Because it's hard businesses where you've got to build the right software. It's complex from a workflow perspective. It's very deep, requires deep subject matter expertise. But more importantly, it also has a very, very tough sales process, right? Once the product is built and you build it right, the market is so fragmented that, your cost of sales is high. So you got to keep all these economics in line in order to make the business model work, right? So who understands that kind of a business model, right? For example, Kamat's business is basically selling to schools, right? 50,000 schools, largely fragmented, small and medium businesses. The software has to work. You got to figure out to buy it most efficiently and sell it at the highest possible margin. So those operating mechanics are very, very similar. So he understands the business, right? The chairman of my board built a similar business in the wealth management space, right? The industry could be different, but the operating mechanics, understanding of the operating mechanics is very, very essential, right? So that becomes so it becomes easy to communicate, right? And the third thing is, people who are easy to get along with and who are accessible, right? So those would be, early stage pick criteria. Right? As you start basically producing, you then basically take a choice of the institute, right? You decide, if do I work with someone who can cut me like a $50 million check without blinking an eye, right? Can I work with someone who would buy me out one day, right? Can I work with someone who would find me one of the best product leads to work for us, right? So you make those kinds of choices based on very, very transactional things, right? The early picks are all built around emotional and, understanding and resonance, understanding the whoever gets the context correct, whoever is accessible, whoever is easy to get along with. Those things all basically influence the pick.
One last question I had probably, since you have worked with a couple of pretty large investment houses, what are the pros and cons of taking investments from, say, large VC or a global investor?
Yeah, the pros, right? So there's always this adage that you can own 100% of $1 million or 10% of $10 million, right? So when you go for institutional funding and funding in general and choose to dilute out yourself and you're taking in money, the onus is on you to build a large enough business where everybody gets their share of pie. So if you raise 100, you better build a $1 billion company, so everybody makes money, right? So that's the pain and the gain, right? So the pain is, so let me talk the gain first. The gain is you get to own a larger operations, you generate more employment for people, you build the product the right way, you get to have, you're not resource crunched, you're not bootstrapped to the extent that you're embracing failure, and you're doing the right thing to basically get the product and your team and the company to the next milestone, right? So you're doing that, right? The pain is basically, the responsibility that comes along with it, that you need to really create a meaningful milestone for people who are trusted with their capital. And the more you raise, the bigger your outcomes have to be, right? So if you have figured out a way to raise very little capital and build an efficient business which grows non-linearly, then you have cracked it, right? But I am very doubtful if those businesses exist, right? If as your business grows large, as much as you wish to be nonlinear, there is a linear component to it. You need, at the end of the day, you don't build businesses, you build people, and your people build businesses. And there are some aspects where you can get efficient and better, but those are not very transformative. Those are all incremental at the end of the day, right? The kind of technology that you build, the way in which you acquire customers, the way in which you expand your revenue once you have acquired customers, those things can all basically add to the non-linearity of how your business model works. But the foundation is still people. Building large companies is also a function of basically having more people to work, and those things require money, and getting funded is a great way to basically do that. The short-term pains and gains that comes along with funding, I'm not going into the nitty-gritties of that, but from an overall perspective, the pain is that you're taken money. If it's a lot of money, you got to build a big business, right? And there is no escaping that fact. And the gain is that you're creating an outcome for people beyond yourself. You're creating an outcome for your employees, for your key investors, for your institutional ones, for your partners, and for society in general. So the scale of operations basically benefits a larger, greater good, right? So that would be the gain. So those would be the two things at a high level.
Great. We'll just take in the last question from Vikas Yadav. Can you go ahead, Vikas?
Hello,
Probably
sir.
The last question.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm working in education sector, and my business model is of service-based kind of model. And the thing is that I have started what we are doing we are establishing our centers in different army cantonments. So we have started our center in Pune. So the biggest problem I have been facing is how should I scale up to different army cantonments, and I should expand, and also how much financial support I should look for, and what should be the right approach to move.
Yeah, Kamal, you want to take that?
Not really. I think can give it a dig. I think you may be able to more ably answer.
Yeah. So because I'm not sure what service bus means. I'm unfamiliar with the business model or
So
yeah, go ahead.
So we have been we are setting our centers in different army cantonments, and we are providing them from quality education, practical demonstration, using that practical demonstration and other classes, and also we have online sort of things. So we are doing this. So
Okay. Maybe we got to basically get a deeper understanding of what your product is all about. I'm assuming, are you involved in a SaaS business, or are you selling? I've still not really understood what you're selling within your company. Can you give some specifics around it?
So we are providing service we are teaching students firstly, and now we are also developing our online content also.
Okay. All right. And you're restricted your target market to just army cantonments. Is that what you're saying?
So we can say defense cantonments, not
Okay.
just.
So basically you have a software platform and content for teaching students who are basically who belong to the defense cantonments. Is that the nature of the business?
Sir, online content can be offered to anybody. There is thing that the one who from army cantonment, they will have they can avail the scholarship, and they can have concession on them, but it's basically for army cantonments, and the service we are providing into the army cantonment is just for that army wards only. But
Yeah.
online content can avail anybody.
I suggest because you share a mail with TiE, I'll forward it to Abhi and probably get his feedback. We have just run out of time. We are supposed to close by 6:30. So probably if you can send me a mail, my mail ID is nirmal.panikar@TiECare. I'll share that with you. If you can share the details over a mail, I'll share it with Abhi.
Okay, sir.
Sure.
So
Okay.
you have your mail inside the mail.
Yeah, I'll just share it in the chat for you. You can take it up.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. So we have just crossed our time limit. Thank you, Abhi and Kamath, for taking your time for this first in the series of our Founders Funda session. I'm sure the audience, many of who are startup, have great takeaways out of the session and learnings, of course. I'm also going to share, I'm also sure that CareStack story is a great inspiration to many startups from the Kerala ecosystem for sure. So thank you, Abhi and Kamath, for your time again. Thank you, participants, for joining us late this Saturday, and look forward to meeting you again next week. Details of our programs would be mailed to you, will be shared. If you have any further questions, please post it to me. I'll share my email ID on the chat box to all of you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for your time.